Most people believe that history is shaped by kings, generals, and revolutions. But what if the real force behind the rise of empires and the collapse of civilizations was something far quieter, something invisible, buried in ledgers, sealed inside private vaults, or hidden behind the walls of elite families? What if the greatest events in human history were not driven by ideology or destiny, but by wealth no one was supposed to see? This story is about the invisible money that moved nations, rewrote borders, collapsed kingdoms, and built new ones. It is the story of fortunes so vast that they distorted entire economies, and of people who learned that the most powerful kind of money is the kind no one realizes exists. And perhaps, without knowing it, we are living through the same pattern again. Long before the world spoke in the language of markets and investments, wealth had already become the gravity of civilization. Every nation, from the earliest river kingdoms to the global superpowers of today, learned the same truth: public wealth builds confidence but hidden wealth controls outcomes. To understand how this force shaped nations, we begin in a world where the idea of wealth was not measured in digits or paper, but in grain. In ancient Mesopotamia, some of the earliest empires kept their wealth in temples. These temples weren't religious sites alone, they were the banks of their age. Priests managed grain, livestock, and precious metals. But as crops fluctuated and droughts came and went, a shadow system grew behind the official accounts. Some temples stored reserve grain never recorded, never disclosed, held privately for elites. This allowed a small group to manipulate prices, reward allies, and weaken rivals. When shortages struck, the citizens believed it was fate. They never knew a few powerful families had the resources to save them but chose not to. And so the first known case of hidden wealth shaping a nation began not with gold, but with grain held in secret rooms. Mesopotamia rose quickly because elites could maneuver quietly. They could stabilize or destabilize with a decision. But this secrecy also created resentment, corruption, and inequality. When invaders arrived, the empire collapsed faster than anyone predicted. Most blamed foreign armies. Few realized the rot had started long before, from inside vaults no one was permitted to see. Move forward 1,000 years, to ancient Rome, the empire that mastered law, architecture, and conquest. Rome was famous for its public wealth, roads, aqueducts, colosseums. But the true engine of Rome's growth and its downfall came from a hidden system of private fortunes controlled by senatorial families. By the late Republic, just 1% of Romans controlled almost all land and mining operations. Many of these families also operated societates publicorum, private companies that collected taxes, managed trade routes, and financed wars. But what the public never saw were the unrecorded transactions, the bribes to win contracts, the secret loans to generals, the private armies funded without Senate approval. Rome's expansion into North Africa and Gaul was celebrated as military triumph. But beneath the banners and speeches, it was fueled by the enormous private investments of wealthy families who expected returns not in patriotism, but in land, slaves, and mineral rights. This hidden wealth created Rome's golden age. But it also created the exact conditions that later destroyed it. Because when wealth becomes invisible, accountability disappears with it. Ruined farmers migrated to cities, unaware that their suffering came from land consolidation driven by elite investments. Inflation soared, fed by private hoarding of gold during crises. Public officials became puppets of financiers. And when Rome eventually split into eastern and western halves, the financial networks that once united it fractured as well. Each side became a patchwork of private wealth trying to protect itself. Rome didn't fall because it was conquered. It fell because its wealth had already been privatized, hidden, and drained long before the final blow. Centuries later, Europe entered the Age of Kings. Monarchs were symbols of power, yet many of them were deeply indebted, controlled by a class of financiers whose names rarely appeared in the history books. Behind the scenes, a new kind of hidden wealth emerged: sovereign banking. Take the case of the House of Fugger, the legendary German banking dynasty. To the public, they were merchants. But in reality, they were the financial power behind European empires. They secretly funded the rise of the Habsburgs, financed wars, purchased papal influence, and controlled silver mines across the continent. Kings performed rituals of authority. But the Fuggers controlled the flow of silver and credit that determined who would actually rule. Their wealth was not publicly tracked. Their ledgers were encrypted. Their operations were hidden behind layers of trusts and agents distributed across Europe. While kings fought visible wars, the Fuggers fought invisible ones, monopolizing copper, manipulating currencies, and shaping borders. Nations believed they were rising by divine right. The truth was far more financial. And when credit ran dry, kingdoms collapsed, often without understanding why. This pattern continued into the colonial era. When European powers crossed oceans in search of new lands, the official story was discovery, exploration, and empire. But the hidden truth was commerce, and behind commerce, private capital. The Dutch East India Company, often remembered as a pioneering corporation, was in fact one of the most powerful private empires ever created. Its true strength was not the spice trade. It was its secretive shareholder alliances, wealthy families forming a shadow network of influence across Europe and Asia. These investors manipulated markets not only in spices but in currency, shipping, and even diplomacy. They arranged assassinations, toppled local rulers, and funded proxy conflicts, all behind a facade of merchant neutrality. Nations believed they were expanding their borders. But they were actually extending the interests of invisible investors who had no national loyalty at all. This hidden wealth built global trade, but it also sowed the seeds of global inequality. It created fortunes so large they distorted entire economies, crashed local industries, and redirected political decisions. And as competition intensified, hidden wealth became even more aggressive. By the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution was reshaping society. Factories, railroads, and mechanization transformed daily life. But behind the public story of invention lay another hidden system, private industrial capital so concentrated that it rivaled governments in power. In America, names like Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Morgan became legends. But the true scale of their wealth was never fully recorded. Rockefeller's Standard Oil controlled up to 90% of U.S. oil production. Yet even this number hides the deep network of shell companies, partnerships, and private holdings he used to disguise the full extent of his empire. J.P. Morgan privately bailed out the U.S. government more than once, effectively rescuing the nation with his personal financial network. He was not elected. He held no public office. And yet he had more influence over American stability than Congress. These industrial fortunes accelerated the rise of the United States. But they also created monopolies, suppressed competition, and widened wealth gaps. Hidden wealth built the skyscrapers, but it also laid the foundations for future crises. And perhaps the most devastating example came in 1929. The Great Depression is usually explained as a stock market crash, a speculative bubble, or a failure of regulation. But beneath these explanations was a more uncomfortable truth: enormous pools of hidden wealth had quietly pulled out of markets months before the crash. Insider networks, private banks, elite investors, and industrial magnates had access to information ordinary people never saw. Their early withdrawals drained liquidity. Their secret agreements avoided public scrutiny. And their influence on government delayed intervention until it was too late. The public lost everything. But many of the wealthiest families emerged from the crisis even richer, having bought assets at historic lows. The collapse of millions became the opportunity of a few. Once again, hidden wealth shaped the destiny of a nation and the world. But this story doesn't end in the past. Because today, the scale of hidden wealth is larger than ever. Modern estimates suggest that trillions of dollars are stored in offshore accounts, shell corporations, secret trusts, and private foundations. These systems shield assets from taxation, public disclosure, and political accountability. Studies estimate that up to 10% of the world's total household wealth is hidden offshore. In some regions, the percentage is even higher. This hidden capital influences elections, shapes laws, redirects global trade, and funds political movements. It buys media companies, creates narratives, and amplifies ideologies. And because it operates from the shadows, its power is difficult to measure. We think globalization is shaped by governments. But much of it is actually shaped by private capital flows so quiet that even economists struggle to track them. If history tells us anything, it is this: nations rise when hidden wealth supports their growth and they fall when it begins to drain away. And we can already see the pattern today. Consider the decline of major industrial nations. Many have experienced decades of rising debt, stagnating wages, shrinking manufacturing, and political polarization. But these symptoms are not isolated. They are connected to massive capital outflows into tax havens, financial speculation, and private wealth preservation. When wealth is hidden, it no longer circulates through economies. It no longer builds infrastructure, funds research, or supports public institutions. Instead, it becomes inert, protected but unproductive. And just like Rome, just like Mesopotamia, just like every empire before them, modern nations are discovering that hidden wealth strengthens the few while weakening the many. The question is not whether hidden wealth shaped the rise and fall of nations. It is whether it will determine the future we are already stepping into. You can see echoes of past civilizations in today's headlines. Cities collapsing under financial strain. Governments dependent on private lenders. Corporations with more cash reserves than entire countries. Billionaires influencing policies behind closed doors. Global supply chains shaped not by public need but by private profitability. These aren't new phenomena. They are the latest chapter of a story thousands of years old. Every empire believed it was different. Every empire believed it was invincible. And every empire ignored the invisible financial forces quietly reshaping its destiny. The question now is whether we will repeat their mistakes. Hidden wealth is powerful for three reasons. First, it controls timing. Nations rise slowly but collapse quickly. Those who hold secret reserves know when to invest, when to exit, and when to let crisis unfold. Second, it controls information. Public economics is about transparency. Private wealth is about secrecy. And where there is secrecy, there is leverage. Third, it controls survival. During crises, the wealthy do not simply endure, they position themselves to dominate the world that emerges afterward. This has been true in every era. But today, with global networks, digital transfers, and multinational structures, hidden wealth holds more power than ever before. This leads us to the modern dilemma: if hidden wealth has shaped history for thousands of years, who truly governs the world today? Elected leaders? Or private financial networks operating across borders, loyal only to themselves? The truth is unsettling. But it is also necessary to understand. Because without seeing the invisible forces, history is only half complete. Of course, hidden wealth is not inherently evil. Throughout history, some of it has funded innovation, protected societies from collapse, and accelerated scientific progress. But the danger lies in imbalance. When wealth becomes too hidden, nations lose the ability to plan their futures. Policies become guesswork. Public trust erodes. Inequality widens until it fractures social cohesion. And once a nation reaches that point, collapse is no longer a possibility, it is only a matter of time. You can see these fractures today: distrust in institutions, polarization, financial instability, and growing global uncertainty. These are not random events. They are symptoms of a deeper imbalance. The same imbalance that toppled Rome. The same imbalance that shattered kingdoms. The same imbalance that triggered revolutions, collapses, and realignments across centuries. The pattern is repeating. But history also tells us that no cycle lasts forever. Nations can recover. Societies can rebuild. Hidden wealth can shift from destructive to constructive. The question is how. And that brings us to the three lessons history has offered, lessons every civilization ignored until it was too late. First, wealth must circulate to sustain civilization. Hidden wealth that stays buried starves the economy it claims to belong to. Nations rise when capital flows openly and fall when too much becomes locked away. Second, transparency protects stability. Not perfect transparency, but enough to prevent the concentration of power that turns financial elites into parallel governments. Societies survive when people believe the system is fair even if it's imperfect. Third, a nation's greatest danger is not an external enemy but internal imbalance. Foreign invasions, economic crises, ideological conflicts, these only destroy nations already weakened by inequality, corruption, and secrecy. History's message is clear: wealth can build nations, but hidden wealth can break them. We are living in a moment where these lessons matter more than ever. Because the pattern is not finished. The cycle is not closed. And the forces shaping the future are still moving quietly behind the scenes. What rises next and what falls may depend on whether we can see the invisible before it becomes too powerful to control. If this story made you think, share your thoughts below. Do you believe hidden wealth still shapes nations today? And what patterns do you see repeating? For more deep dive stories like this, consider subscribing. The past has already shown us the future, we just have to learn how to read it.